A new year, the perfect opportunity to both recognize that time is continuing to march on at increasingly rapid rates, and to set some goals to try to better yourself for the upcoming year. I've actually got some goals for myself too. I want to improve my focus, get into better routines, and learn how to cook better. There's just one problem though. I'm terrible at sticking to my New Year's resolutions, and I don't think that I'm alone in that. According to a Forbes health poll, over half of responders noted that their New Year's resolutions don't last longer than 3 months. Setting and accomplishing goals is really difficult for a lot of people at any stage of life, and I've never been very good at actually realizing my New Year's resolutions in a way that actually sticks. I'm not the greatest at keeping a journal or putting reminders in my phone, so I'm still searching for that method that's going to work best for me to stick to my resolutions. That's it! You could say that I'm a fan of video games, so of course, video games are the perfect medium to help me get my life in order. During the era of the Nintendo DS and Wii, Nintendo had a whole line of software aimed at a more mature crowd that was intended to help you improve your mental and physical health called Touch Generations, and this might be exactly what I need. So, in this video, I want to document how much I can improve my life using the methods and tools found within a selection of Nintendo DS and Wii games. I'm really interested to see if these games were successful in their efforts to fit into an adult's life and help them achieve their goals and improve their physical and mental health in a fun way. So, that's exactly what I'm going to measure. Over the next 60 days, I will be measuring my progress using a variety of in-game training regimens and growth criteria to see if Nintendo can help me get my life in order. Just as a quick disclaimer before we go any further, this video is an anecdote and should not in any way be taken as serious health advice for your physical or mental health. I know that it's probably fairly obvious that my goal here isn't to scientifically prove whether these methods work or not on an objective, broad scale. I'm not looking to definitively prove or disprove the research of Dr. Kawashima. This is just a fun, informative video about measuring my personal experience with these games and seeing how I improved by gamified criteria and how I subjectively feel about the experience. So, if you're looking for serious health advice about how to lose weight or improve your health, you're not going to find it here, and it's best to get that advice from trained professionals. However, if you are interested in seeing my experience with these games and using them to achieve a specific set of goals, let's delve into the specific software that I will be playing for this experiment. To start off, to improve my mental capabilities, I'll be playing the hit DS game Brain Age, specifically Brain Age 2 because I played a ton of the first game when I was younger, so I know all of the tests and exercises, but the second game is completely new to me. I'll be measuring my brain age and partaking in at least one training exercise every day to train my brain to be a little bit more active. I'll track the progress of my brain age scores over the course of these 60 days to see if my brain actually does get younger by the game standards. In a very similar vein to my brain's health, I'll also be measuring my eye health as well using Flash Focus, a game that is strikingly similar to Brain Age that focuses on vision health and assigns you an eye age that you can check daily, so I'll make note of my eye age's progress daily as well. For my physical health, I deliberated on what software to use to measure my progress here for a little while. Initially, the choice that made the most sense was Wii Fit, since, you know, it's kind of that game's whole thing, and Wii Fit actually does assign you a Wii Fit age, so this seemed pretty cut and dry. However, Wii Fit determines your Wii Fit age mostly by conflating your BMI with your performance in a few different challenges to provide you with a final age. But there's something about using Wii Fit that doesn't feel like it would provide me with the sort of criteria that I'm looking to measure. BMI, or body mass index, is already a controversial means of measuring health relative to weight. The Wii Balance Board is also notoriously terrible at actually doing its job and accurately weighing people, and most of all, I'm not really looking to lose or gain any weight through this. I'm at a healthy weight for my height and age, and I'm not really looking to lose or gain any weight here. Ultimately, I just want to get into a habit of getting up and getting active since, I'll admit it, I'm a couch potato. Through this exercise, I'm looking for a new way to get more active in a fun way that actually keeps me in a routine. Outside of all of that though, I mostly wanted to use the gamified metrics determined by my performance in-game to judge my progress, rather than a strange combination of a real-world metric that may or may not be read accurately and my performance in minigames. And then it came to me. Wii Sports has exactly what I'm looking for. Wii Sports has a daily fitness test that you can take where you'll play 3 training minigames and be scored on 3 physical stats: balance, speed, and stamina, culminating into your daily Wii Fitness Age. Man, what was up with Nintendo in assigning ages to every single part of our being? Anyways, this will be perfect because I can gamify my physical growth with in-game stats and see if I improve by the end of the experiment by training and testing myself in Wii Sports every day. For all 3 of these games, I will make notes of my scores each week and figure out my average score for the week to see if we make steady progress as the experiment continues, since the daily scores can tend to fluctuate a bit. I'll also make notes of each PB or personal best score that I hit along the way. So now we've got some great methods for testing mental, visual, and physical growth in each of these games. But hold on, exercise is just one part of the puzzle that is your physical health. And a big resolution of mine this year is to eat better and to cook more meals at home. One of my biggest vices is eating food out and the occasional DoorDash, which is expensive and probably not the best for me. So I want to learn how to make more exciting meals at home that don't tempt me to go out as much. However, I gotta admit that I'm a pretty terrible cook, and I don't even know where to start improving that. Introducing 2 pieces of Nintendo DS software that are going to help me: America's Test Kitchen Let's Get Cooking and Personal Trainer Cooking. These games both feature tons of recipes that I can try to cook at home to hone my skills, make unique meals, and to encourage me to stop eating fried chicken so much. I'll be making 4 meals a week using a recipe from one of these games, breaking them up into 4 weeks of America's Test Kitchen and 4 weeks of Personal Trainer. That makes 16 meals from each game, so that should give us a good sample size to see what these games' recipes are like, and if you too can learn to cook from your Nintendo DS. So, with all of those explanations out of the way, let's get started on getting my life together.
All right, let's get started.
Starting this first week, I started off very excited, but also kind of nervous to see how I was going to perform in each of the facets of my life here. It's been a long time since I've played Brain Age or Wii Sports, and I've never played Flash Focus or used any of the cooking games. So this experience of playing all of these games alongside each other will be really new, but also somehow kind of nostalgic for me. I was also a little worried that some of my prior experience with these games might skew the results of the tests. However, it's been probably over a decade since I've touched these games, and once I booted them up and started to take the tests, I got humbled really quickly. Brain Age assigned me an initial DS brain age of 41, which is significantly older than my current age of 26. If you've never played Brain Age before, your performance is scored through a series of 3 tests and then you're assigned a brain age, and you want this to be as young as possible, with the best possible score being 20 years old. So, as you can imagine, this score of 41 was an absolute tiger drop to the ego, although some of this may have been due to the infamous DS microphone minigames. The Brain Age games are centered around the research of Dr. Ryuta Kawashima, a Japanese neurologist who studied the effects of aging on the brain. His research and proposed methodology was published in the book Train Your Brain: 60 Days to a Better Brain, whose training exercises served as the basis for the Brain Age games, particularly Brain Age 1, which used a lot of the same tests that were provided in the workbook. Dr. Kawashima proposes that training your brain through specific exercises can help to stave off the effects of an aging brain, and most of the exercises center around memorization, pattern recognition, quick calculations, and reading or speaking aloud. This is where Brain Age translates very well to a video game. The game handles the timing and reading the accuracy of your answers, which makes taking these tests quick, snappy, and satisfying. This is all well and good, but the problem is that there are a couple of tests in these games that require you to speak aloud into the DS microphone, which is, to put it delicately, notoriously terrible at doing its job. Scissors. 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 This makes the minigames that require you to speak into the DS mic really difficult. You can say the right answer into the microphone, but it will often struggle to understand you even if you're enunciating as perfectly as possible. Or maybe I'm just making excuses and my brain really is that tired and I do need to train it to keep it active. Over the course of the entire week, my Brain Age score averaged out to 39, and I'm curious to see if things improve as I go. For my Wii Fitness Age, I initially got a Wii Fitness Age of 44, and my average for the week was was 35.57. The Wii Fitness Age was a tough one to predict. At first, I was worried that I would overperform since I used to play Wii Sports a ton back when the Wii first came out, but I was immediately humbled by picking it back up again because I am really rusty at this game. I also found myself a bit interested in the methodology of how the score is calculated. This game essentially focuses on 3 fitness stats: balance, speed, and stamina, and presumably picks one fitness minigame randomly from each stat to test you on each day. Each sport has 3 fitness minigames, which means that there are 15 different testing activities in total. This could mean that it is possible to be tested through an assortment of sports, or you could happen to roll all of the same sport in one test, which may sway the results of the scores since I am definitely better at some of the sports in Wii Sports than others. Regardless, I'm excited to play more because it's been years since I booted Wii Sports up and it feels good to be back. So please humor me while I introduce Flash Focus for a bit. This is my first time ever playing this game, and I gotta say, it's, very strange. This game was co-developed by Nintendo SPD and Bandai Namco of all studios, alongside the guidance and expertise of Dr. Hisao Ishigaki, a previous professor at the Aichi Institute of Technology. Flash Focus aims to recapture the same lightning in a bottle that Nintendo successfully caught with Brain Age, but applied to a very different organ, the eyes. But something about Flash Focus just feels a little hollow. In Brain Age, the game assigns you a, well, brain age because the whole basis of Dr. Kawashima's book was staving off the effects of aging on the brain. This was an interesting way to gamify the methods that Dr. Kawashima outlines in his book. The book itself is more of a workbook that feels like homework, with math questions and weekly tests that you're supposed to take and note how long it takes you to do them. This was why Brain Age, the video game, was such a runaway success. It took an already successful brain training program that required a lot of time and devotion to note and track your results, and compacted it into a DS game that can present the same tests, but evaluate and track progress much more conveniently. However, Flash Focus tries to take Brain Age's formula and work backward. It has the successful structure for a daily training program for a person to train and test a vital organ, but it doesn't have the unique hypothesis to provide a reason why this training is so necessary or what results the player could expect from the program. Dr. Ishigaki plays a much more subdued supervisor role in Flash Focus compared to Dr. Kawashima's more prominent role in Brain Age, and that's totally fine, obviously. However, there's something about Flash Focus's eye age system that just feels empty. For the first test, you only get a rough estimate of what your eye age is, and then on subsequent tests, you'll get an actual number for your eye age. As far as I can tell, eye age doesn't seem to be a hypothesis that Dr. Ishigaki has ever presented on his own, and the game does not really seem too concerned with the need to stave off effects of aging on your eyes. It seems more concerned with the idea of focus ability, which is comprised of 5 different visual attributes that the game aims to help you improve. When you perform an eye age check, the game also judges you based on these 5 attributes, which is really interesting because it makes the actual eye age that you get seem more like a superficial metric rather than something you should really be concerned about. Flash Focus is so fascinating to me because the concept of age is just so crammed into this game without really much of a reason besides the fact that Brain Age did it, and those games sold tens of millions of copies. Flash Focus is the sort of product that you get when a game is a surprise smash hit and the board of higher-ups wants to see if they can do that again. This game really wants to remind you of Brain Age, even in subtle ways too, from the game's charts to its daily stamps to even the little tidbits that you get in between training exercises when logging on each day. Although it's way more charming when Brain Age does it because, well, it did it first, but also because there's a personification of the doctor that authored this knowledge telling you this in a uniquely personable way. In Flash Focus, they try to mimic that personality when telling you information about your eyebrows that reads like a "Today I Learned" post on your aunt's Facebook wall. It just feels strange not to hear these little tidbits from the expert himself. Instead, I'm hearing this from whoever this is. Who is this guy? What are his credentials? Where's his license? Who is he to tell me anything about my eyes? Anyways, I digress. My eye age for this week was honestly better than I thought it was going to be, averaging at about 28.86. I'm interested to see if there's any growth in the future, but we shall see. Finally, I cooked 4 meals for myself this week using recipes from America's Test Kitchen. For people like me who may not have been aware, America's Test Kitchen Let's Get Cooking is a North American exclusive DS game that was developed by Indie Zero, a small studio who had worked with Nintendo on unique DS games like Electroplankton and would eventually go on to make games like NES Remix and Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. This game was also published by Nintendo as part of the Touch Generations line. This game was based on the American cooking show of the same name and has 300 different recipes to choose from, spanning tons of different types of meals, from breakfast foods to seafood to even desserts. This software is pretty nifty because it not only has a ton of recipes, but you can create a calendar of when you want to make these meals, you can create multiple users in a family if you have a whole bunch of cooks in the kitchen, and you can even create a shopping list of all of the ingredients that you need for the recipes that you want to make. Now, while I didn't take my DS with me to the grocery store because I didn't want to be that guy, I did work very hard to follow the recipes that I chose as closely as I could, and I'll make a note of anything that I couldn't find near me or any substitutes that I made along the way. You'll also see some tabs on your screen with information pulled from the game detailing how long each recipe takes to cook, the calories per serving, how many people it will feed, and then my personal 1 to 5 star difficulty ranking, with 1 being a really easy recipe and 5 being a more challenging recipe. So, the first meal that I tried was this beef and broccoli stir fry, which wasn't too tough, but was something that I've never really made for myself before. As a reminder, I'm not a very good cook. I've made some simple meals for myself before, like ground beef tacos, and I've worked in food service back in the day, but I've never been one to make very unique or, well, good meals for myself, and I want to change that. So, while I was making this stir fry, I honestly found myself having fun using this game to learn a new recipe. Maybe it was the novelty, maybe it was the gamification of working on this video, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time making this dish. The game itself was, dare I say, shockingly competent. So the cool thing about America's Test Kitchen DS is that the game will read the instructions to you out loud as you cook, and you can talk to it to ask it to repeat steps, advance to the next step, or in some instances, request more information and even watch a video from one of the chefs about that specific part of the cooking process, with the most delightfully low quality audio I've ever heard.
It's important to add food to a pan that's been properly heated to prevent sticking or scorching. Start with cold
2010.
oil on a cold
Being able to speak to the software is very helpful because that way you don't have to touch your precious DS when you've got nasty meat-covered hands. However, just like in Brain Age, this technology isn't perfect. For starters, you have to say specific phrases and only those phrases to get it to work. And even when you do say the right phrase, it still may not register. Next step.
What was that?
Please? But while you're cooking, this game listens to you more than your Google Home. The mic is so insanely sensitive to where it will pick up chopping or whisking noises as you talking to it.
Come again?
Which can lead to the recipe getting skipped ahead like 10 steps. So try to place your DS as far out of reach as possible while you cook to pick up less noise. Unfortunately, the DS mic wasn't necessarily known for its gain control or quality, but beyond all of that, it's surprisingly useful and novel to cook with this game guiding you through the recipes. You can even use it to set a timer, although if you're in a kitchen, you're probably drowning in timers already, but this one lets you play egg on the game and watch while you wait, so that's kinda cute. This game has a lot of charm to it, honestly, right down to the shockingly good music. The soundtrack to this game was composed by some of Nintendo's most prolific composers and has tons of really pleasant bossa nova tracks that sound like something you'd hear at a cozy restaurant and puts you right in the mood for some good food. Seriously, it's like unnecessarily lovely. And to demonstrate this, I want to point you to the game's settings theme. It's a catchy little tune on its own, but it brilliantly interpolates the sound of what I assume to be chopping vegetables into the song, which is so clever. Just take a listen. I'm just in awe at the amount of character and personality the developers put into this little game that is essentially a digital recipe book. It's adorable. Anyways, back to the dishes. Like I said, for the first night I made a beef and broccoli stir fry, and it was pretty good. The sauce was pretty tangy, and the recipe wasn't too hard to follow. Not something I'd make every week since making the sauce involved a lot of ingredients that I don't usually have and probably won't always have handy, but it was tastier than I expected it to be. The next night I made a bacon bacon, egg, and cheese breakfast sandwich, mostly because I've made one of these before on my own and I wanted to keep things pretty simple. And yep, this was an egg sandwich, all right. Nothing really fancy, special, or different in this one. If you decide to make this one yourself, my advice is to not cheap out on the English muffins like I did if you can afford it. Some really nice, fluffy English muffins from a bakery near you would probably make this hit a lot more than these very cheap English muffins that I bought from Walmart. The following night, I made some pan-seared shrimp since I'm a sucker for seafood, and oh man, was this one simple but really tasty. The seasonings that the game has you apply are really simple ingredients that almost anybody would have in their kitchen, and the lemon juice and parsley really added to the flavor. My only complaint is that it doesn't really work as a standalone meal. If you maybe make some rice with it, maybe some pasta to serve as a base, or you could even make shrimp tacos with them. If you add something to it, this would make a really good meal to make, and it really wouldn't take you that much time to cook. Finally, for dessert this week, I decided to make these pretty simple triple chocolate chip cookies, and oh, did these hit. I did make them big as hell, so they expanded a lot on the pan and don't look very picturesque, but trust me when I say that they tasted great. They were super rich and really easy to make, definitely worth the prep time it took to make them. Overall, the first week has left me very excited to see how the overall results pan out. I found myself having a lot of fun learning how to cook and at least making a couple of dishes that worked out really well and tasted better than I expected. After this first week, I felt eager, ready to take on the next several weeks to see how things progressed and if this feeling of accomplishment remains. I started off week 2 pretty invigorated, ready to hopefully see some improvements, but sadly that did not happen like I had hoped that it would, at least in some areas. For my recipes this week, I started off with crab cakes because I love seafood and crab cakes sounded like an interesting thing to try to make. However, I gotta say that I was kind of disappointed in the recipe for these crab cakes. Overall, they were mostly fine, but they were just kind of bland. Like I mentioned before, when I'm making these meals, I force myself to follow the recipe as closely to what they say as I can without adding or removing any seasonings where possible. But that led to these crab cakes feeling like they were missing something. These crab cakes didn't have any real sauce in them besides mayo, which I think likely contributed to the blandness. No Worcestershire sauce, no Dijon mustard, nothing. Ultimately, it was edible, but these would probably be classified as a misdemeanor in Maryland. Thankfully, the next recipe that I tried was pasta caprese, and this one fared much better. It was super easy to make, didn't require a lot of ingredients, and tasted really fresh and light. This is the perfect thing to make if you want something simple with some fresh ingredients that could feed a few people. However, if you're just making it for yourself, please do yourself a favor and half the recipe, or else you'll be swimming in pasta. I'll be honest, I don't know why I chose this next recipe. I'm doing this challenge in January, and for some reason, I chose to make these Aloha skewers that are meant to be made on a grill instead of on a stovetop, but I'm obviously not able to bring my grill out in January. I also stupidly bought bamboo skewers instead of metal ones, which led to the pork on these skewers being underdone on the inside, so I had to take them all off the skewers and re-cook them again to get them up to temperature. After all of that, though, they were still pretty good. The marinade especially was very tasty, and I imagine that these would be even better on a grill cooked the right way. Thankfully, the final recipe this week brought it back, which was a baked brie en croûte. I love cheese, and I wanted to try my hand at something that at least looked challenging. This wasn't too intensive, it mostly boiled down to wrapping a puff pastry around a wheel of cheese and baking it, but man did this turn out good. The cheese was gooey and the apricot preserves that the game suggested paired perfectly. If you need to bring an appetizer to a gathering and want to impress people with something that looks challenging but isn't actually all that tough, make some baked brie. It'll go over really well. All in all, an okay week this week with recipes. Some went really well and some were disappointing, whether it was due to the recipe itself or my ineptitude. My average brain age score this week was 31, which was a remarkable improvement, and I received a new personal best of 24 on day 9, the first score beneath my actual age. This was a great sign of growth, but then the following day, Dr. Kawashima gave me a panic attack by doing this. What? Oh, I forgot this was a thing. That's still bad! I had honestly forgotten that this was a mechanic at all, and he totally freaked me out with this. Well, hopefully in the future I don't get pranked this badly again. I'll say, playing Brain Age again was honestly more fun than I remembered it being. Yeah, sure, it is just little brain teasers like unscrambling words or solving math problems, but it's done in this really cute, lovable way that makes training your brain fun. I also didn't know before playing this that Brain Age 2 in particular has a secret version of Dr. Mario, which was a nice little surprise and served as the perfect wind-down exercise. Overall, I'm having a lot more fun playing this game than I thought I would, honestly. My eye age also improved slightly as well, averaging out to about 28.38 this week. I think now is about as good of a time as any to talk about flash focus and its actual gameplay. It sucks. What you're seeing on your screen is from the eye age test that I've been taking every day, and it's about as fun as it looks. While Brain Age is also an educational game and has the potential to be dull, I think that it keeps you coming back with tests that don't really feel like homework. They feel like mini-games. This feels more like a little puzzle mini-game where you're intently watching a runner pass people and trying to memorize their position or unscramble a group of spinning letters, but with flash focus, it feels like I'm taking optometry tests for fun. Now, to be fair to flash focus, there are two different types of tests here, the core tests and the sports tests, and one is definitely better than the other. Flash focus has an emphasis on its benefits to athletes primarily since Dr. Ishigaki's expertise pertains to sports visual training, so the game has several different minigames based on different sports, ranging from table tennis to football. These sports minigames are easily the most fun content that the game has here since they're the closest thing that this game has to feeling like an actual video game. The sports minigames range from kind of fun to pretty boring. The two minigames that stand out the most for me are baseball and table tennis. Baseball actually provides some challenge and requires you to follow the ball and time your swing, which I actually found pretty engaging. Table tennis was similar, where you're trying to keep the volley going without missing. Minigames like these where you're a little bit more consistently engaged were way more fun, especially compared to sports like boxing and basketball where all you're really doing is tapping sprites. The unfortunate thing is that these sports minigames were never used in your eye tests. Those are always just the core training exercises, which are riveting exercises such as find the right C shape, input this number, tap these boxes. Like, come on. The DS's system settings already have a version of this minigame. This is so incredibly dull. Flash focus just lacks any semblance of personality or charm. It doesn't feel like something anybody would really play for fun. Now for my Wii Fitness Age. Thankfully, my average score for the week improved slightly to 34.38, but on day 9 in particular, I did horribly, getting a score of 61. I don't know what it was with me this day, but I could not catch a break in any of these events. First up, I had target practice, which can typically be an easier one unless if you get a bad hit, which I got several in this run. Next up was spin control, and I did not realize that I was this rusty at Wii Sports Bowling. I didn't even get past the 3rd lane because I had no control over the ball at all. Finally, batting practice was probably the event that I performed the best at, but I only hit 20 out of the 30 balls, which if you played this event before, you know that that is not very good. Overall, I was shocked at my performance here, but thankfully I got a score of 27 the following day, so my overall score improved for the week. But now this giant crater is going to weigh the graph down for the next 6 weeks. I'm glad that it seemed like I grew this week, but between the difficulties with the recipes and some lows while taking my Wii Sport fitness tests, I felt my morale take a hit this week, as I realized that maintaining a solid growth pattern would probably be a little bit harder than I thought. I went into the following week a little bit stressed, but hopeful for what was next. Week 3 saw some great successes and a few disappointments. For starters, my Brain Age score saw a continuous improvement, averaging out at 26.71 this week. However, on day 17, I hit a new personal best, a score of 21. So before we talk about this PB, I want to explain how Brain Age tests you in a bit more detail. So when you take the Brain Age check, the game asks you if you can speak into the microphone at that time. If you can, you'll always take the rock, paper, scissors test, then you'll play 2 other tests at random. If you select that you can't use the microphone, the game selects another one of the tests at random to replace rock, paper, scissors. There is a hidden mode that you can use that lets you choose your tests, but I refuse to use that for the entirety of this challenge, since that would really ruin the integrity of the tests if I could just always pick ones that I'm better at. There are a few different testing types. There are math questions like Math Recall, which requires you to perform calculations while remembering a scribbled out number from a previous question, and serial subtraction, where you just subtract the same number down over and over again. There are reaction tests like Symbol Match and High Number, where you're quickly matching symbols to numbers or tapping the highest number respectively. Then finally there's Number Memory, a minigame where you have to remember 25 numbers places. For this PB, I got the test Symbol Match, High Number, and Serial Subtraction, all of which I performed pretty well in equally. Symbol Match and High Number are tests that are usually kind of easy for me. Maybe it's all of the Mario Party that I've played over the years, but I'd like to think that my reaction skills are pretty good. Serial Subtraction is also really easy, especially the version that I took here. Subtracting 9 is pretty easy for me since you just sequentially decrease the first digit and increase the second. While I was happy to hit this new PB, it kind of felt hollow in a way, since I was being tested on a curve with tests that I was pretty confident in. If I had hit this with Number Memory, that would have meant a lot, because that test has been pretty consistently my weakest thus far. Regardless, this PB was pretty exciting because it was just 1 point off from a perfect Brain Age score. While I did still feel like there was room for improvement, at least this was a sign that my highs were getting higher. Anyway, my eye age continued to improve weekly, with my average score hitting 27.14 this week. Nothing too noteworthy here outside of a PB on day 17 with an eye age of 23, which is crazy because I didn't really feel like I did all that well until I got to Number Tap, which is a pretty easy test, at least for me, that I feel like I aced and it brought my score up overall. For my Wii Fitness Age, I saw a stronger improvement this week compared to last week, with an average of 29.86 and a small PB of 26 on day 17, and then on day 20, I tied this PB again. On day 17, I was a little shocked that I performed as well as I did because I got 2 boxing tests, which is arguably the sport that I feel I consistently perform the worst at. However, sandwiched in between those boxing tests was a putting challenge, and golf is probably my favorite of the sports in Wii Sports. I don't know what it is, but I just love golfing games, and Wii Sports Golf is no exception. Day 20 score made a little bit more sense since I got power throws, which I think I'm alright at, then 2 baseball challenges, which I also think I'm alright at. Ignore last week, please. Thankfully though, the biggest win was not having a stinker day like I did last week, which greatly brought my score up. The recipes this week were interesting. So before I started this challenge and even looked at any of the recipes in America's Test Kitchen DS, I told myself that I wanted to try to make at least one thing that was vegan, since it'd probably be good for me and it would also push me a little bit out of my comfort zone to try something new. And let me just say, if you're vegan, you're probably going to want to steer clear of these recipe books. The nice thing is that this game has an option that allows you to exclude certain ingredients and only see recipes that don't include that ingredient. So if you or someone you're cooking for has an allergy or severe distaste for a certain ingredient, you can exclude it and just pick from things that you'll likely enjoy. So when I excluded any ingredients that weren't vegan, that left me with about 39 recipes out of 300. And unfortunately, not very many of them were actual meals. Most were pretty simple things like tomato salsa or gazpacho, and some of them were just condiments like a vinaigrette or a barbecue rub, which kind of feels like they padded the recipe list here to be able to say that this game had 300 recipes to choose from. So for my vegan recipe, I settled on this spicy Asian cucumber salad, and good God, was this bad! I chose this one because it marketed itself as a crisp cucumber salad with big flavor, and let me tell you right now, the big flavor is vinegar. Just a lot of vinegar. This did not have big flavor, and I was so disappointed with this that for the first time during this challenge, I wound up having to make myself something else for dinner because it was just that bad. To any vegan folks that are watching, I'm sorry. I tried. I really did. Thankfully, the following night I made chicken fajitas, which were really good. It's kind of hard to severely mess up chicken fajitas, and while I think that this recipe probably needed a little bit more seasoning, all in all, I thought it was pretty good and very easy to follow. The next night's recipe was pretty good too, which was a nice chicken marsala. Even though mine doesn't look perfect, I really liked the taste of the marsala sauce. It was very rich and flavorful, just the sort of meal I needed to pick me up up after that awful cucumber salad, my god! And for the final meal this week, I made tortilla soup, which unfortunately flopped a little bit. I typically love tortilla soup. I love a lot of brothy soups in general, but something was either wrong with this recipe, or I must have made it wrong because the soup came out incredibly bland and watery, with almost no flavor to it. I was bummed about this one in particular because I like tortilla soup so much, and I was hoping to have a warm soup recipe for the winter months, but this one disappointed me immeasurably and my day was ruined. Overall, despite some bumps in the road, I walked out of this week a little tired and worn, but feeling a little bit more confident in my abilities and my resolve. Moving into week 4, I was feeling marginally better than I felt going into week 3, but as the week went on, I felt more and more encouraged as the results began to show. My average brain age score this week was 25. Not a huge change from last week, but I felt that my scores were more consistent, with my worst score only dropping to 30. On day 28, at the very end of the week, I had a surprisingly good run, getting pretty decent scores in both serial subtraction and symbol match, and a shockingly good score of 20 out of 25 in number memory to get the score of... Yeah, I tied my PB, which was a bit of a bummer, but it felt good to tie my PB with one of my worst tests in the mix. My eye age improved again, averaging out to 26.43. Ironically, the same average as the Wii Fitness Age. No notable scores in my eye age test this week, but I did hit a PB of 24 in my Wii Fitness Age on day 22, then again on day 24, then again on day 27. Yeah, I hit a new PB and then tied it twice in the same week. It might have been too much to ask to PB twice in 1 week, but tying the score 3 times feels a bit cruel. Hey, at least it feels like I've regained at least some of my skills in Wii Sports and am performing better, so that's great. I'm finally starting to feel like those old Wii Sports skills are coming back to me. It took them long enough. However, for the last week of meals from America's Test Kitchen DS, I really ended on a high note, if I do say so myself. My first meal this week was a classic chicken parmesan, which was really easy to make and tasted really good. Like, I was shocked at how juicy and flavorful this was. If you wind up getting this game, you should totally try this recipe if you like chicken parmesan. It's worth it. Next, I tried these summer fish packets, which was a fillet of salmon on a bed of summer squash and tomatoes with some cooking wine and lemon butter on the top, wrapped in foil and cooked in the oven, and man, this is probably going to be something that I continue to make for myself. When I do make this for myself in the future, I'll probably add some more seasonings on top of the salt and pepper, but other than that, the fish was succulent and flaky, and this was really easy to prepare and is perfect for a little taste of summertime when it's incredibly cold outside. For my final full meal, I made myself some one-pot chicken and rice, where you cook both the chicken and the fried rice in the same pot, and this may have been my favorite recipe that I've made thus far. The chicken was incredibly savory and the rice had a ton of flavor to it without needing to overwhelm it. This was so good, my mouth is watering as I'm writing this portion of the script. Absolutely a highlight for me. And finally, for the final recipe of this game, I decided that I wanted to really challenge myself and make a New York style cheesecake from scratch. And while this was a pretty long process and I'm not the world's best baker, I think that it turned out pretty good and it tasted great. If I was to redo this recipe, there are things that I would hopefully do better, but I was surprised at how easy it was to follow this game's recipe as I was working on this cheesecake. Overall, closing the chapter on the first half of this challenge, I felt accomplished already. I did not expect to already feel at least some consistent growth at this point, both numerically in my age scores and in my cooking, but I really did feel like I had made some progress and I now have some recipes that I know that I can make at home that I enjoy. But since I had already kind of proven that my scores were improving, I found myself wondering, I wonder if I can strive to get a perfect score of 20 in at least one of my tests before the experiment ends. And furthermore, what kind of challenges await me in this next recipe game? Moving into the second half of this experiment, I honestly was starting to get a little confident. My recipes were consistently getting better, my scores improving, I was hitting PBs in my tests. I felt like I was on top of the world and I was ready to challenge myself a little bit more. However, this week, while it overall was still a good week, presented some bumps in the road that showed that my confidence may have been a bit premature. My brain age average this week was 27.71, which is the first time that my average has increased or worsened throughout this experiment. I think what happened was that my confidence was a bit shaken on day 30 when I, believe it or not, tied my PB again. That 21 glass ceiling was starting to feel a bit suffocating as I honestly thought that I locked in during this test, even getting a high score in Simple Match. The following day, I got my weakest score in the past 12 days, which I think unfortunately shook my confidence and brought my average down. Nothing super noteworthy in my flash focus scores this week, but my average eye age for the week did improve slightly to 26.29. I'm amazed at the fact that I seem to be consistently improving in this game, but the differences between my daily scores are significantly less dramatic than the other two games. My Wii Fitness Age unfortunately also increased this week, averaging at 29.29, partially due to day 32's score of 36 and day 34's score of 37. I didn't really think that I did this badly this day, but I guess I could have done better. However, on day 31, I received a score of... Are you kidding me? I keep tying this PB, which is so disappointing because I feel like my gameplay is improving, but there was still room for improvement, I suppose. For my meals this week, I have officially switched over to our second recipe game, Personal Trainer Cooking. If you're not from the US, you may know this game by its original name, Cooking Guide, Can't Decide What to Eat, which is a hilariously condescending title for a video game. This game was also developed by Indie Zero and published by Nintendo, and there are a lot of similarities between this game and America's Test Kitchen, Let's Get Cooking, a title that I am excited to stop saying. Personal Trainer Cooking actually predates the previous game, but the reason that I chose to play that game before Personal Trainer Cooking was that its recipes were generally simpler and more accessible to somebody who isn't much of a cook. However, I was very excited to try Personal Trainer Cooking because it has a greater emphasis on cultural diversity in its dishes than our previous game, which I was really excited for. This game features a large map and lets you pick tons of recipes from all across the world. So, just as a heads up, if I mess up a dish that's from your culture, I'm very sorry in advance. I'm still learning how to cook well, and I'm learning how to make these dishes from a DS game, so there's bound to be some parts of these recipes that should be done differently. So please feel free to give me some cooking tips in the comments if I mess up one of your favorite dishes. Getting back to Personal Trainer Cooking, this game's recipes were provided by the Suji Cooking Academy, and a lot of the technical issues that I had with the previous game still apply here, like the overly sensitive microphone. This game unfortunately lacks the calendar planning system that the previous game had, and you can't create user profiles. However, you can select the amount of servings that you want to make in Personal Trainer Cooking, which you couldn't do in the last game. Other than that, it is still largely the same experience otherwise, down to the Chef Game & Watch that is playable during the kitchen timer and the fire music. So, enough preamble. What did I decide to eat this week? For my first recipe this week, I decided to start with banana brownies. Brownies are one of my favorite desserts, and I figured that this would be an easy way to transition into the new game with a semi-familiar recipe. Unfortunately, these were kind of bad. They did not have a lot of sugar in them, which is fine, but they tasted very plain and dry, and I don't think that I would recommend them personally. For my next dish, I decided to make a California roll because I'm actually somewhat familiar with making sushi. I worked in a sushi restaurant part-time for a little while, so I'm at least familiar enough at making and cutting a roll that I can make them for myself for dinner pretty often. I'm pretty rusty at it, my rolls aren't the cleanest, but they work for me. However, the recipe for this California roll was weird, to say the least. For starters, their sushi rice recipe resulted in some of the least sticky sushi rice I have ever had the displeasure of trying to work with, which made rolling and cutting very difficult. The recipe also tries to get around using a sushi mat to roll the rolls and instead opts to use plastic wrap, which I've never done before and will likely never do again. This method just felt like it didn't work well at all. The rice wouldn't stick to the roll and the end result was terrible. So tonight for dinner, I made a mess. Well, at least the next recipe turned out a lot better. For the next meal, I made huevos rancheros, which was simple to follow, used a lot of ingredients that I already had, and tasted great. I've already remade this for myself since I've been editing this video. And finally, for my last recipe, I made chicken pho soup, which was pretty tasty. I gotta say, I don't think that mine holds a candle to pho that you'd get at an actual restaurant, but for homemade pho from a guy who's never made pho before, this was pretty competent, I'd say. Overall, this week's recipes were a step below last week's, but I still walked out with some good dishes. Although by the end of this week, I found myself getting a little bit dejected about my results. I started to question, is this where I plateau? Will the next 4 weeks be comprised of tied PBs, some mid-cooking, and a shaken ego? Was this the end of my growth? It definitely shook my mentality as I exited the week, hoping that the next week would be better. As I went into week 6, I found myself questioning if I had hit my growth plateau, and even though there was some good growth over the course of this week, I still felt a bit demoralized because of a few difficulties I encountered. My average brain age score did improve this week to 25.71, which, while slightly higher than my best week, is still a good improvement overall. There weren't too many notable scores here, although a smaller milestone is that this is the first week in this challenge where my scores were all in the 20s, which is a nice achievement and was a more subtle example of growth. My eye age also improved over last week with an average score of 24.43. I also hit a new PB on day 38 with a near perfect score of 21. One thing that I've noticed with my flash focus scores is that I don't feel like my performance has changed all that much in the past couple of weeks, but that my score is usually more closely tied to the tests that I'm taking. I found that my hand-eye coordination score in particular was very closely tied to the test that I took. If I took the box tap test, then my score was usually worse and my eye age was higher, but if I got number tap, then my score was usually higher and my eye age would be lower. Since each attribute only has a few tests available to test that specific part of your vision, it was a lot easier to be able to conclude what tests resulted in higher scores and what tests resulted in lower scores. This was the case in all of the games that I played to some extent, but it was most glaringly obvious in Flash Focus. Anyways, on to Wii Sports. My Wii Fitness Age average also improved this week compared to last week, averaging to 27.29 for this week. However, on day 38, the day that I hit a PB in Flash Focus, I also hit a milestone in my Wii Fitness Age. No way! Are you Yeah, this was insulting, but it was so brazenly BM that it turned around to be hilarious. I had received these prank scores before, but the fact that the game pranked me by convincing me that I had not just hit a PB, but a perfect score of 20 was so egregious and rude, but it was honestly so funny that I couldn't help but laugh. Anyways, at least towards the end of a week, I hit an actual PB of 22, which felt pretty good because it involved 3 tests that I was just kind of okay at, but it also felt a little empty because I had thought that I had hit 20 this week. On to cooking. This week I started off with some vermicelli soup, which was a real hit. It was super savory, easy to make, and fast. Definitely the sort of thing I see myself making again in the winter in the future. Next, I chose to make some chicken tikka masala, which is a favorite of mine, and I was excited to learn how to make this one. Right off the bat, I'll say that this recipe tasted good. The chicken was sweet yet savory and the seasoning was on point, but unfortunately I think I overcooked the sauce a little bit, so it doesn't quite look as good as it tastes. But trust me when I say that it was good, and if I cooked it better, it would have been great. Speaking of cooking things poorly, I attempted to make yakitori this week, although I was dumb and tried to make bigger portions to serve as an actual dinner, instead of how they're usually served, which is more of an appetizer. In this, I used skewers that were way too big, and I pushed these pieces of chicken too close together, so I had to take them off the skewers to cook them to temperature. They were still pretty tasty, the marinade and seasonings were good, but maybe just double check what size of skewers you should be using for this recipe. Finally, I decided to make a margarita pizza, which was incredibly simple, but wound up being very dry and bland, which I was very disappointed by. I was shocked that this recipe did not call for any olive oil as a base, and and without any sauce or oil as a base, this pizza wound up being very flat and plain. It felt like eating crackers and cheese, but in a large pizza form. All in all, there were some pretty decent recipes, but this game's recipes were getting more challenging and pushed my abilities more, which was definitely humbling and a little bit demoralizing. Moving into the 7th week of this experiment, my spirits were still pretty low, and I really felt that I was plateauing in my results, especially having Wii Sports pull the rug out from under me like that. However, I also knew that this experiment was quickly approaching its conclusion, and I was determined to see a little bit more growth before I reached day 60. Throughout this week, I was driven to find some sort of success again, to climb higher than the plateau that I found myself on, and this feeling wavered as I trudged through the week, hitting predictable score after predictable score. However, on day 49, the final day of the week, I logged onto Brain Age 2 determined to make an improvement, but skeptical of the possibilities. Clutching my DS, I began my Brain Age check for the day. My first test was Symbol Match, one of my stronger tests. Despite some admittedly incomprehensible drawing, I managed to get a score of 38 seconds. Not bad, just a couple of seconds behind my top 3 scores, but not the peak of my potential. Next up, High Number, and as I felt the pressure to perform rising, I found myself making some stupid mistakes, but performing well with a score of 36 seconds, just barely beneath my top 3 scores. As Dr. Kawashima reveals my final test, my heart races and I question my performance thus far. Were these scores even any good? Would I need to unlock new potential and top all of my high scores to get that coveted 20? Is it even possible for me? Math Recall, my final test. This is one that I'm pretty good at if I lock in, but one distraction or miscalculation and my memory is shot, and so is my chance at a PB. I tapped the start button and locked my eyes to the screen as if I was competing at EVO. Question after question flies past the screen as I hurriedly write numbers down on the right screen like I'm light. My eyes bounce back and forth, trying to make sure that I don't miss a single scribbled out number. Finally, I reach the end of the questions and I've done it. A new high score. Barely. 39.5 seconds. I thought to myself, was that enough? Is this going to be yet another 21 like I got earlier this week? As these doubts fly through my head, Dr. Kawashima appears and shows me my results. I had done it. A perfect score of 20. I exhaled a long, accomplished sigh of relief. It was done. That plateau that I was on finally showed an incline, and I had reached the Brain Age summit. It felt good, but somehow I almost felt like this run wasn't all that special. What did I do differently? 2 of the 3 scores weren't even in my top 3. Maybe I had been making progress all along, and it was difficult to see, but this PB made me feel that actual, real progress had been made, and I had conquered the game. My average score also improved this week to 24.57, which, for the first time, made my progress in this game feel a little bit more tangible. Did my scores improve because I staved off the effects of aging on my brain? Did Brain Age really help me improve my focus, something that I've always found myself struggling with? Or was I simply just getting more familiar with the tests, so improvement was inevitable? The likely answer is the last, but for once, I did feel like there was some real growth here, even if it's just in a silly 20-year-old DS game. Unfortunately, my iAge and Wii Fitness Age did not follow this same trend. I wound up finishing this week with an iAge average of 25.86 and a Wii Fitness Age average of 28.86, both increases from last week. No PBs to speak of either, but honestly, I was fine with that. The high from my Brain Age PB helped this slight disappointment to just roll off my back. The recipes this week also helped to contribute to this feeling of success. First, I kept things somewhat simple with a sauteed salmon with green sauce, which was really easy to make and pretty tasty. The salmon was good and the sauce, while not super flavorful, was a good complement to the glaze on the salmon. Next, I made some classic pork pot stickers, which was a new experience for me, but I had a lot of fun making these and they turned out really good. They were really savory, the right amount of crispy, and the recipe made a ton of them. If you want to learn how to make pot stickers at home, this is a great way to do it, and it's a lot more satisfying than heating up frozen ones. The next recipe was a simple ginger pork, which was exactly that, and it was good. Nothing too fancy, but I really enjoyed the ginger flavor and this was simple to make. Unfortunately, the final recipe was unsuccessful. I tried to make fried chicken, which I thought was going to be a shoo-in for sure. Seasoning the chicken and everything was totally fine, but then when I was making the batter, the game recommended that I mix the flour, eggs, and milk into a mixing bowl together, then mix it all together to make the batter, which didn't make any sense to me. I've never seen any fried chicken made this way, and I was much more used to dipping the chicken into the milk, eggs, then flour sequentially to get everything to coat evenly. Even the chicken parmesan recipe from America's Test Kitchen used the latter method. However, this singular batter was excessively viscous and would not cling to the seasoned chicken. Attempting to then fry the chicken made it immediately burn all of the batter off, and it burned the chicken really badly, which made it completely inedible. So, unfortunately, this was a failure of a recipe. I was down about it because I honestly thought this one was going to be a simple slam dunk, but it's okay. At least the pot stickers slapped. So, since the fried chicken didn't work out, I made beef bulgogi, which was pretty good. This footage does not really do it justice. Probably one of the less interesting meals that I made flavor-wise, but ultimately a fine dish that made for a good dinner. This recipe definitely doesn't compare to beef bulgogi that you get from a local Korean barbecue place, though. Going into the final week, I felt encouraged. Despite a decent amount of mediocrity this week, I felt like the fog and weight of not progressing was finally lifted, and I was excited to keep that going into the final week. Riding the high of my PB from last week, I went into the final week of this challenge encouraged and maybe almost a little cocky. My brain age average this week increased a decent amount, up to 26.71. Since I had already hit the perfect score, it didn't really feel like there was much more to chase after or anything that would really give me that level of accomplishment again. But then, on day 54, it happened again. Another perfect score of 20. I was so happy to hit that perfect score twice within the span of 5 days. And this score felt even more gratifying because I accomplished this with number memory as one of my tests. Number memory is probably the test that I'm the worst at. My memory is not my strongest suit, and while I did perform well at this test in the past, I also had rounds where I performed terribly. In my 20 run, I got a really good score of 22 out of 25, a tie for my PB in this test. This made this 20 run feel even more satisfying than the first one because I achieved the perfect score with one of my weaker tests. So I knew that this score wasn't a fluke. I genuinely improved. For my iAge and Wii Fitness Ages, I unfortunately didn't see improvement this week in my personal bests, but thankfully my averages did improve overall this week. My iAge average dropped to 23.71 this week, and my Wii Fitness Age average dropped to 26.57, which was a nice bit of overall growth from the previous week's average increases. To wrap up, I'll also discuss the last 4 days for each game's scores as well, since they didn't count in the weekly average for this week. My brain age average for these 4 days was 27.25, my eye age average for these 4 days was 23.75, and my average Wii Fitness Age was 26 flat. There weren't any notable PBs to discuss in these last few days, which was a little bit disappointing, but all in all, the challenge was complete and I exited my time with these 4 games feeling accomplished. To wrap up this long, arduous experiment, my dinners this week actually went rather well. First, I made spaghetti pepperoncino, a fairly simple dish, but it was really hearty with a tiny bit of spice, which I thought was pretty good. Next, I made some chicken teriyaki, which was shockingly easy to make and turned out really tender and savory. This is definitely going to be something that I meal prep for myself for future lunches and such. Next, I made chicken satay, but unfortunately I didn't have the correct skewers for it, so I just made the pieces of chicken on their own. However, the marinade on this one was incredible. It had this wonderful flavor and spice to it that I honestly could not get enough of. This will definitely be a repeat for me, especially if I need to bring an appetizer to a gathering. And then to end the experiment, I made a Korean rice bowl, which was tasty, but unfortunately not super authentic. And part of this was my fault, but part of it I will also blame on the game's recipe. Unfortunately, I struggled to find some of the ingredients for this recipe, namely the shimeji mushrooms, and I also did not add the spinach namul or the bean sprout namul, which I thought would be explained as part of the recipe steps since the game lists the ingredients to make it in the list, but it just never got into making the spinach and bean sprout namul, so I forgot to put it on my bowl until I was actually eating it. I'll own up to some of that being that I couldn't find all of the ingredients necessary for this recipe, but I do think that the game dropped the ball here by not letting me know how I should make these ingredients. Overall though, the bowl was still pretty good. The meat had a really nice flavor to it, but it was definitely missing something. And Well, that closes the book on this challenge. 60 days, 32 recipes, and a whole lot of successes and failures later, and I was finally done. I ended this week pretty tired, but yet very happy that I had come this far and actually saw this challenge through to the end. Emerging from this challenge, I found myself relieved, lighter, like my days had a lot more time available in them, but also a little bit nostalgic for the routine that I had just established for myself. But all in all, I felt accomplished and very interested in evaluating the progress that I had made. So now I want to compare my progress throughout the past 8 weeks, evaluate some data points from my results, and talk about my experience and briefly review the games that I played here. Starting with Brain Age 2. In week 1, I got an average score of 39, then in week 8, I wound up with an average score of 26.71, which was an improvement of 31.5%. My best week was week 7 with an average of 24.57, and my personal best score was obviously the coveted 20, which I was able to achieve twice. Overall, I did see a noticeable improvement within Brain Age 2, which was honestly a pleasant surprise. This was one that I totally thought I would not see that much of an improvement in given my prior experience with the series, but I was honestly pleasantly surprised at my growth here. Now, I will say some of that growth was likely that I was getting more acclimated to the tests that the game threw at me since there were only 6 of them. Honestly, I was a little bit disappointed in Brain Age 2 for that reason. I feel like this would have been a good opportunity to add more variety to the tests compared to Brain Age 1, or at the very least also include the tests from Brain Age 1 to dilute the pool a bit and provide a bit more diversity in the tests that you take. However, I liked a lot of the tests that Brain Age 2 presents, and its exercises were familiar yet different than what I was accustomed to in Brain Age 1. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Brain Age 2, and I was happy to see growth. Moving over to Flash Focus, in week 1 I got an average score of 28.86, then in week 8 I got an average score of 23.71, which was an improvement of 17.82%. Not quite as dramatic of an improvement as Brain Age, but my initial iAge score was already pretty decent at the beginning, so the improvement was always going to be a bit understated in this game. My best week was week 8, and my personal best score was 21, which I got once. This was a good PB, but it was also kinda sad because I was so close to also hitting the coveted 20, but it's okay because my weekly averages almost consistently improved throughout the experiment, which was pretty cool to see. I will say, for the amount that I criticized Flash Focus in this video, there was at least a notable improvement in my scores week to week that was even more consistent than the other 2 games. However, I will maintain that I think that most of this improvement is due to me getting more used to the tests. Since each category only has about 2 tests that can be played, you learn them really fast. I personally doubt that Flash Focus has had any sort of real effect on my eyesight in all honesty. If it improved any part of my vision, it may have been my reaction time, but I'm still a bit skeptical of the causality there. I don't doubt that there's real expertise and valuable information in this game, especially for athletes doing vision training, but for me as a gaming experience, I felt like this game fell a bit flat. Overall, glad to see improvement, but I don't know if it was worth playing through Flash Focus for 60 days to achieve that. And finally, Wii Sports. I started off with an average score of 35.57 in week 1, then got an average score of 26.57 in week 8, which was an improvement of 25.3%. My best full week was week 4 with an average score of 26.42, but my average for the last 4 days was also slightly lower at 26 flat. My personal best was a 22, which I only achieved once. This one was probably the PB that I was the most disappointed with, because there were times that I honestly thought that I could hit the coveted 20, especially after it was literally waved in front of my face. However, when I look back on the footage of my gameplay, there is definitely a noticeable improvement in my performance, especially in many games that I used to be pretty bad at. Now, would this replace a regular exercise regimen? God no. It is a fun little way to get some bites of activity in, so maybe on a rest day you could play some training exercises mixed in with some Wii Fit exercises, but I just don't think that this would replace traditional exercise. However, this did revitalize my love for Wii Sports, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time playing through this game again. Finally, I want to give some thoughts on America's Test Kitchen, Let's Get Cooking, and Personal Trainer Cooking. These games are very similar in their function and charm, and I was honestly honestly impressed with how useful they could be as interactive cookbooks that you can use without even having to touch your DS. They're certainly not perfect, but both of these games made it easy to find and learn new recipes in a fun way. However, I personally think that they do have different advantages and disadvantages. Personal trainer cooking predates America's Test Kitchen DS, so there are some features that the latter has that the former doesn't. Most notably, at least for me, America's Test Kitchen DS had user profiles and the Try It feature, which allows multiple people to suggest and even schedule recipes for certain days. This feature was really helpful when it came to planning meals, and I missed having this when I transferred over to Personal Trainer cooking. America's Test Kitchen also has more recipes than Personal Trainer, but I would say to take that metric with a grain of salt because a lot of America's Test Kitchen's recipes are for really simple things like barbecue sauce or salad dressing. America's Test Kitchen's recipes were, at least in my experience, generally simpler and easier to source. Comparatively, Personal Trainer Cooking's recipes were more challenging to make and source ingredients for, but there was a noticeable increase in variety and diversity. I would say that if you're not very confident in your cooking skills, America's Test Kitchen is probably the game that you should start with. But if you are interested in making a greater variety of dishes from a variety of cultures, Personal Trainer Cooking will meet your needs better. Regardless, you'll be getting a pretty neat cookbook with a lot of personality, as long as you're comfortable with bringing your DS into the splash zone. I have to say that these interactive cookbooks were by far the area that I feel like I grew the most, at least on a personal level. I learned a lot about cooking through making these recipes, and I've already repeated recipes in the weeks that I've been editing this video, like the summery fish packets and the chicken tikka masala. I was shocked at how much I really enjoyed learning how to cook through this charming, albeit strange method, but hey, we've all got to learn somehow, right? When I set out to attempt this challenge, I was mostly interested in testing a few things. I wanted to see if I would actually see measurable results by playing these games daily for a set period. Would my brain age improve if I train my brain in minutes a day? Does playing Wii Sports actually improve your Wii Fitness Age? I'm not too surprised that the answer to those was, in at least some way, yes, even if I'm a bit skeptical of the fine details of their tangible effects on my mind and body. However, beyond that, I wanted to see if I could establish and stick to a routine, and maybe learn something while I was at it. Transparently, I've never been one who's been very good at establishing a routine or sticking with a New Year's resolution, which is probably evident by the upload schedule on this channel. In the past, resolutions almost always slip through the cracks in some way or another, but I feel that I was able to positively improve my life in a real way this time by gamifying this routine and making it more of a fun challenge. I've always had a hard time finding new recipes that interested me or were approachable for a beginner. Recipe sites can be frustratingly riddled with invasive ads, and cookbooks are helpful but can't give dynamic instructions or video demonstrations. But establishing a routine and confining myself to the recipes in these DS games actually helped me stick with it, and I wound up making some food that was actually good. And even when I did experience failures like with the cucumber salad and the fried chicken, normally that would knock any wind out of me and I'd have no interest in trying to learn any further. But since I was honestly having fun with cooking, it was a lot easier to bounce back from these failures. So if you have also struggled with setting personal goals and meeting them, I hope that this story gives you a little bit of hope that you can accomplish things that you've always meant to do but haven't gotten around to yet. Sometimes we need to accomplish things in a different way by gamifying results or trying to make something mundane fun, and it's all about finding what methods work best for you. And for me, well, playing these games actually did improve my life in one way or another. Thanks for watching.